Yes, yes, yes. Oh, hold on a second. Oh, no, I just got to my office. I have a group of people here. Hold on, just a second. Please just give me a moment. Who was it again? The Hittites. Yes. And how much? No, no, no. 2,000 cubic bushels of grain is too much. Didn't you get the updated formula? No, it was updated last night. Yeah, yeah. No, you're supposed to check every morning before you do the calculations. It should be in your camel pack where no, you're not in trouble. You just need to be careful with this. All right, hold on. Let me help you out here. What was that number again? Okay, no. Okay, 606 cubic bushels of grain. That's what it is with the new formula. No, it's okay. It's okay. Just make sure to check for the new formula every morning. The new calculations are put into your camel pack. No, you're welcome. You're welcome. Yeah, when they're done with that grain, they come back to buy more grain. We have to make this grain last another 5 years. That's right. Okay. All right. No, it's okay. It's okay. Thank you. You're doing good work. All right. Okay. Say hi to your mom for me. All right. All right. But bye-bye. Yep. Bye-bye. Welcome to Egypt. My name is Joseph. And I'm afraid you've caught me at a very busy time. We're in the midst of a worldwide famine, and the entire world is coming here to Egypt because we're the only country that has grain. All of the people are coming to Egypt. They're all coming to me to buy grain. And your pastor contacted me this past week. He told me that you had been studying about my life. And he asked if I would take some time out of my busy schedule to relay my story to you in my own words, which I am happy to do. Your pastor is a fine man, and any way that I can help him, that's what I want to do. And so to give him the week off today is something that brings me great joy. And so let me tell you my story in my own words. Where to begin? I told you my name was Joseph, of course. I'm 30 years old. I know I look a little older. Sometimes I feel as if I'm in my mid-50s, but this is just premature gray. I'm under a lot of pressure. I've been in Egypt for 13 years. I came here when I was 17. I didn't come here by choice. I'll tell you that story in just a moment. Let's see what else. Oh, I'm a Hebrew. I'm not Egyptian. I know you couldn't tell from looking at me, but I'm not from here. I'm from the land of Canaan, hundreds of miles away. And I worship the God of the Hebrews. Yahweh is my God. I don't worship these Egyptian gods at all. Let's see, what else should you know about me? All right, this is going to be important for my story. I have 10 brothers and 1 sister. I come from a very big family. My father's name is Jacob. My mother's name is Rachel, and I'm their only son. Now you might ask, well, how did you come from such a big family if I'm the only son of my mother and father? Well, it's because Rachel, my mother, was my dad's second wife. His first wife, Leah, she had 6 sons. And then his third wife, Bilhah, had 2 sons. And then Zilpah, the fourth wife, had 2 sons. And so 6 plus 2 plus 2 plus 1, that's 11 boys. And I have 1 sister named Dinah. And so I come from a large family. I do not recommend multiple spouses. As you will see, this did not work out well for our family. It's a very complicated family. Now, the other thing that you need to know is that my mother, Rachel, was my dad's favorite wife. And therefore, I was his favorite son. And I should have seen the problems that was going to cause in our family, but I didn't see it because, I was just a boy. I enjoyed that attention. I enjoyed spending time with my dad. He would take me to the city gate and I would watch him at the gate do his business transactions, and I was in awe of him. And then he would take me on trips, and we would spend time together, and we would play games, and it was just me and my dad. My other brothers weren't there with me. And over time, although I think I can see it now in retrospect, but my brothers became more and more bitter because I was my dad's favorite. In fact, one time, my dad gave me the very best present that I'd ever received. He gave me a beautiful coat. And This coat was like nothing I had ever seen before or after. Nothing in the great nation of Egypt is to compare to this coat that he gave me. It was woven with the tightest weave, and every color of the rainbow was woven into this brightly colored coat. Gems were sewn into the fabric. There were tassels. It was beautiful. It was gorgeous. It showed how much my father loved me, and I enjoyed wearing it. Well, everything began to go wrong one night when God spoke to me. You see, God has always been close to our family, and I've always felt that God has been close to me. And one night he spoke to me through a dream. I had a dream where my brothers and I were out in the field harvesting, and there's nothing unusual about that, except in the dream we were all bundles of grain. And my sheaf, my bundle of grain, rose up, and the other bundles bowed down to my bundle of grain. I didn't know exactly what this meant, but the next morning I put on my colorful coat and I gathered my brothers around me and I told them about my dream. They didn't seem very excited for me, but I didn't think much about it. The next night I had another dream. In this dream, I was in the heavens, and there were 11 stars, and the sun and the moon were there. And my star rose up, and my brothers, who were the other stars, they bowed down before me. And the sun and the moon, which were my mother and father, they bowed down before me. And so the next morning, I put on my coat again. And this time I gathered not only my brothers, but I gathered my mom and my dad, and I told them the dream. And then my father spoke to me. And this is when I knew something was wrong. He spoke to me harshly. He said, "Do you think that your mother and I will bow down to you?" He had never spoken to me that way before. I didn't know how to take it. I didn't know how to take it. Well, the next day, my father sent me out to go check on my brothers. Because my brothers had become more and more embittered against the family, he would send me not just to check on them, but to spy on them and to bring a report back. And so he sent me out, as he always did, to check on my brothers. I brought some food. I brought with me. I wore my coat, and I went out and I found them in the field. And there they were. And I gave a greeting to them, as I always do. "Brothers, it's me, Joseph. I have food for you." I began to walk towards them, and they began to run towards me. And as they ran towards me, I saw in their eyes such fury. I saw murder in their eyes. It frightened me. And so I turned to run, but they were too quick. They caught me and they grabbed me and they wrestled that coat off of my body roughly, and they threw me to the ground, and I knew they were going to kill me. And then Reuben spoke up. I was so thankful he did. He said, "Brothers, we must not do such a thing. This is our flesh and blood." And so the hands grabbed me again. They grabbed my arms, they grabbed my legs, and they began to carry me. And I was just looking up at the sky while they were carrying me. And they carried me for some time, and then they threw me. And I fell, and I fell, and I fell, and I hit the bottom of an empty cistern. And there I lay, hurt, alone, rejected, frightened, looking up at the sky, which was now about this big out of the top of the cistern. But I'm going to tell you something that might surprise you. While I was there in the bottom of that pit, God's presence was with me. God has always been close to me. And while I was there in the pit, for all I knew, I was going to die in that pit, that my brothers wouldn't kill me with their own hands, but they would let nature kill me. And I had a peace that came over me. And so I just sat there in the pit, not knowing if they would ever return. But then they did. A few hours went by, a rope was thrown down, and they said, "Joseph, come up." And I grabbed the rope, and they pulled me out of the pit. And when I got back to the sunlight, there were Ishmaelite traders, a very grand caravan of merchants. Now, my brothers, they were talking to the Ishmaelites, and they were bartering a price for something. I could see in their eyes that they were no longer full of fury. Their eyes were now full of greed as they looked at the fat money pouches hanging off of the saddles of the camels. And I didn't know what they were bartering for, but soon I did know. They had settled on a price to sell me to them. So they handed me over to the Ishmaelites. They removed the rest of my clothing. My coat was long gone. And they put on me the clothing of slaves, and they put me with the rest of the slaves in the caravan. In my life, I faced many, many difficult challenges, but not one of them compares to the hurt that I felt on that day when I was rejected by my family. I was sold into slavery by my brothers whom I loved. I was the youngest boy in the family. I looked up to my brothers, and being rejected by them to this day carries a deep, deep hurt in my soul. And so off I went with the Ishmaelite traders, and guess where they were going? They were going to Egypt, and that's how I got here. Excuse me, the phone is ringing again. Just a moment. Yes, hello. Hello. No. It's good to check on that. The Ammonites are approved for purchasing grain. Yeah, the council approved them last Wednesday. Yes, that's true. Yes. Yeah, we are now taking cattle in exchange for grain. Doesn't just have to be money. Okay. But listen, make sure you check to make sure the cattle are still alive. The last time we accepted cattle, half of them were dead. Send your best guy. Just make sure that the cattle are alive, and then we will give the Ammonites grain, and that's fine. Okay. No, you're welcome. Call anytime. Okay. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye. All right. I apologize for that. Let's see. Where was I in the story? The Ishmaelites brought me to Egypt, and they put me up for sale. And I was bought by a man named Potiphar. And Potiphar was a good man. Potiphar was a kind man. Potiphar was a powerful man. Potiphar was a military man. He was the head of the palace guard. And he bought me, and he brought me into his home. And I wish that you could have seen his home. I had never seen anything like it. It was an incredible estate. There were palm trees, tall, swaying in the wind that wound around the perimeter of his property. There were peacocks throughout the property, so glorious. And there were pools of fresh water with colorful fish in them. It was the most incredible estate, like nothing I had seen before. And I began to work for this man named Potiphar, and he was good to me, and I enjoyed working for him. And the weeks went by, and the months went by, and then the years went by. And I gained favor in Potiphar's eyes. He began to give me more responsibility and more responsibility. He trusted me with everything. And soon I was made the manager of his entire estate. And things were good for me there. I'm going to tell you something else that might seem crazy. But it seemed to me when I was working for Potiphar, when I was put in charge of his entire estate, that maybe God was using that evil for good. Maybe God was using the evil of my brothers to accomplish something good in my life and in the life of Potiphar, my master. I know it seems crazy to think that when I was still a slave, but those were good days. But then things changed again. You see, Potiphar had a wife. I never liked her. She always bothered me, and I tried to avoid her as much as I could. But one day, Potiphar was out. It seemed like all of the other servants were off that day. I had business in the library, so I walked into the library, and there she was, reclining on the couch. I turned to leave immediately, but she said, "Joseph, stop." And so I stopped, and I turned to look at her, and I'm embarrassed to tell you this, but in her eyes was lust for me. And I turned to go, and she said, "Joseph, lie with me." And I knew I was trapped. And I knew I could not do this thing. I could not violate the relationship that I had with Potiphar, for Potiphar had told me that I had dominion over everything except for his wife. And I knew that I could not violate the commands of my God. And so I turned to run. I didn't know what else to do, but she was like a snake. She struck out and she grabbed my outer cloak, and I struggled against her, and she ripped it off my body. And it reminded me so much of when my brothers ripped that colorful coat off of me. She ripped off my outer garment, and then I fled the room, and I went to my room. And there I waited until I was summoned, as I knew I would be. I was summoned before Potiphar. I walked into the room, and there was Potiphar, and his wife was next to him. She had a look of satisfaction on her face. I looked at Potiphar. I can still see those eyes. The eyes that were full of disappointment. Disappointment with me. And it broke my heart, but I couldn't defend myself against him. She had told him that I had attacked her, and his eyes of disappointment turned into eyes of anger, and the soldiers came and they grabbed me, and they took me away, and they threw me in the prison. So there I was in another pit. I remember that first night like it was yesterday. It was dark. I was alone. I was afraid. I thought my life was over. I thought that I would be killed the next day, if not sooner. But I'll tell you something again, just like I was in that pit, that empty cistern, when I was in the prison, God's presence was with me, and he gave me a supernatural peace. I knew that God was with me in the pit. I knew God was with me in the prison. And so the next day, you know what I did? I woke up and I had a new master, the jailer. And I tried to have a good attitude, and I obeyed the rules, and I tried to be helpful, and I began to be the best prisoner I could be, because that's where God had put me. And so it's really very similar to when I was in Potiphar's house. The jailer took a kindness towards me, and he began to give me more responsibilities as he saw how faithful I was. First, he had me to be in charge of giving the food out at mealtime to the other prisoners. And then a few months later, he put me in charge of receiving the shipments that came in for supplies to the prison. And eventually, I was the one making the cell assignments. In fact, there was no one with more responsibility in the prison than the jailer himself. I was his right hand. I'm going to tell you this again, also about my story. Even though I was in prison, even though I didn't want to be there, it was almost like God was using that evil that Potiphar's wife inflicted me with, that God was using it again for good. I didn't want to be in the prison, but I had favor in the prison, and the jailer was kind to me. Well, the weeks went by, the months went by, the years went by, and I wasn't killed. And then one day, 2 VIPs came into the prison, very important prisoners. These 2 men came in, and they worked for Pharaoh himself. One of the men was the cupbearer to the king. The king's life was in his hands. He would taste the wine, taste the food before giving it to the Pharaoh. And then the Pharaoh's baker was put into the prison. He would cook for the palace. And because I was making the cell assignments, the jailer put me in charge of these 2 men. And we knew some of the same people when I was in charge of Potiphar's house, and we became friends. And we would hang out together, and we would talk with one another, and we would encourage one another. We began to develop a relationship. And then one morning, they came down, and I could tell that something had changed, because in their eyes, I saw confusion. And I said, "Brothers, what's the matter?" And they both said that they had had dreams the night before, dreams that bothered them, dreams that were confusing to them. And I said, "Well, tell me your dreams, because God has given me the ability to interpret dreams, and that's how God seems to speak to me." And so first, the cupbearer told me his dream, and immediately the Lord told me what this dream was about. And so I said to him, "This is good news for you. In 3 days' time, you're going to be restored to your position in the palace. You're going to be restored to your old position. Your reputation will be restored. This is good news for you, my friend." And then the baker told me his dream. And the baker I thought it would be a good dream, but it ended up not being a good dream. But I had to tell him what the dream meant. And I said, friend, your dream means this. In 3 days' time, you will also be taken up to the palace, but there you will be executed. His dream was something about ravens eating food off of his head. And what it meant was that he was going to be hung by the neck and the birds would come and eat his flesh. Well, that put a little damper on the next couple of days. And sure enough, the guards came and they took these two men away. And I haven't seen them since. I know that God is true, that the cupbearer was restored, and that the baker was hung. But before they left, I asked the cupbearer if he would do me a kindness. I said, when you're restored to your position before Pharaoh, please remember me before him, because I am here in prison and I am here unjustly. I do not want to be here. I do not deserve to be here. So when you're restored to your position beside Pharaoh, please speak kindly of me to him, that I might be rescued from this place. And he told me that he would do so. And so after the two of them left, I had a kindling of hope in my heart. And nothing happened that first week. And I thought, well, maybe it'd take him a little bit of time to find the right opportunity, but nothing happened that month. And then nothing happened that year. And another 2 years went by and I gave up hope. I worked in the prison. I worked as hard as I could, assuming that I would be there the rest of my life. And then the guards came again. And this time they came for me. And they came into the prison, two very, very strong men, and they threw clothes at me and they said, Joseph, prepare yourself, clean yourself up, wear these clothes. We're taking you out of here. And I said, well, where are we going? But they wouldn't tell me. So I cleaned myself up. I put on the clothes that they brought, and they led me out of the prison into the light. And we began to walk in the city. And I said, where are we going? And they wouldn't answer me. But I saw that we were heading towards the palace. And so I asked them, are we going into the palace? They wouldn't tell me. But we went up the steps of the palace and we opened the doors to the palace. And I said, are we going to see someone in the palace? And they wouldn't answer me. And so we walked down the hallway of the palace until we came to the doors of the throne room. And they opened the doors to the throne room of the Pharaoh of Egypt. And we walked in, and there in the throne room was Pharaoh, the most powerful man in the world. And next to him was the chief cupbearer. And I stood before them. And I looked at the chief cupbearer, and his eyes and his face said, his eyes asked me for forgiveness. They sought me beseechingly, and I smiled at him and I nodded at him. I had no ill will towards him. I forgave him long ago. And I looked at Pharaoh, and his eyes were full of fear. Can you imagine that? The most powerful man in the world, his eyes were full of fear. So I stood before Pharaoh, and Pharaoh said to me, my cupbearer tells me that you have the ability to interpret dreams. I have had some dreams that disturb me, and none of my magicians and none of my wise men can tell me what they mean. Joseph, can you interpret my dreams? And I knew what I had to say to him. I said, Pharaoh, no, I cannot interpret your dreams. But the God I worship can, and the God I worship will tell you what your dreams mean. What did you dream? And so the Pharaoh told me his dreams. He said, I was dreaming, and out of the Nile River came 7 healthy, fat cows, plump, healthy, and they were full of life. And then out of the same Nile River came 7 sickly cows. 7 cows that were gaunt and looked as if they were on the verge of death. The contrast could not have been greater. And then Pharaoh said that the 7 sickly cows opened up their mouths and devoured the 7 healthy cows. Can you imagine a cow devouring another cow? How terrifying that must have been. But once the sickly cows had eaten the plump cows, they were just as sickly as ever before. The Pharaoh said, that was my first dream. He said, I went back to sleep and I had another dream. He said, I dreamed about a stalk of wheat. And on this single stalk of wheat, there were 7 heads of grain that were plump, that were healthy, that were delicious, they were full of life. And then he said, I had a dream about a second stalk of wheat, and on this stalk of wheat, there were 7 sickly heads of grain, 7 dry heads of grain, 7 heads of grain that were just about dead. And he said, these 7 sickly heads of grain opened up their mouths and devoured the healthy heads of grain. And he looked at me and he said, Joseph, what do these dreams mean? And immediately the Lord gave me the interpretation of the dreams. And I said, Pharaoh, the Lord has told you what will come to pass. These 2 dreams mean the same thing. That coming to Egypt will be 7 years of abundance, 7 years of abundant crops, of fertility, of harvests like they've never seen before, 7 years. But following those 7 years of harvest will be 7 years of famine. And the famine will be the worst famine that anyone had ever seen, so that it makes the 7 years of abundance look as if they never existed. I said, Pharaoh, this is what the dream means. And I went a step further. I probably shouldn't have. But I said, Pharaoh, what you should do is this. You imagine me telling Pharaoh what to do? I said, Pharaoh, you should appoint a man full of wisdom to oversee the 7 years of abundant crops and to store the grain and to collect 1/5 of all of the produce from the farmers, so that when the famine comes, Egypt will have enough grain so that your people may live and not die. That's what I said to him. And Pharaoh looked at me and he said, Joseph, you are that man. And so only the Pharaoh of Egypt could take a prisoner, and immediately I was appointed to be the governor of Egypt. The only man more powerful than me was the Pharaoh himself. And so during those 7 years of abundance, we collected grain, and we set up collectors, and we set up processes, and we set up barns, and we built more barns, and the grain stacked as high as the heavens. We collected grain for 7 years. And then sure enough, the famine began 2 years ago. And that brings us to today. For the last 2 years, we've been selling grain, not just to the people of Egypt, but the nations around have all come to Egypt so that they might live and not die. It's my office phone. That phone only rings if it's something extremely important, so excuse me for just a moment. Yes, this is Joseph. Really? How do you know? Because of their clothing? Okay. What do they want? Of course, they want to buy grain. Certainly, yes. Okay, all right. Oh, just a second. There are 10 Hebrews at the gate. Okay? All right. There are 10 Hebrews at the gate. All right, this is what I want you to do. Move them to the left side of the road, and I can see them from my window. I'd like to see who they are. Yes. Okay. Yes, thank you. It's them. It's my brothers. It's my brothers. It's my brother. All 10 of them are there at the gate. My brothers are here at the gate. What should I do? What should I do? Think, Joseph. Think. Ask God for wisdom. No, Joseph, they're not here to finish the job. No, they don't know I'm here. They don't know I'm alive. They wouldn't be able to recognize me if they saw me. My brothers are here. I have to go. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'll tell you this. I know that somehow God will use this for good. I have to go. I have to go. Give greetings to your pastor. God bless you.